Hello everybody and welcome to my review of episode 5 of My Adventures with Superman. So this episode kicks things off with Lois beginning her investigation into Clark being Superman, really putting the screws to him to try and prove that he really is the Man of Steel. Deathstroke meanwhile also makes a full appearance this episode and he looks fantastic as he returns to Metropolis and continues to round up people using the tech that Livewire unleashed on the city in the first episode. This gets Clark's attention and he begins to connect the dots on them all. And not only that, he also feels the weapons are familiar, no doubt because they are Kryptonian or at least use parts of Kryptonian tech. Lois uses this opportunity to try and get Clark to confess he's Superman with a bit of a sly plan to get her, Clark and Superman together in a room together to investigate it. Jimmy meanwhile gets saddled with Steve Lombard and actually makes the photographer question his role in his team up with Clark and Lois, figuring that he's the quote-unquote Steve of the group, something that he doesn't like at all. It's interesting to see how the writers are approaching Jimmy, since in the comics sometimes, well, a lot of times, writers often forget that he is involved in stories or can be involved in stories and just don't either bother to use him or just forget about him. And here they're playing with these ideas. He's beginning to feel like he's the third wheel of Lois and Clark, and it's interesting it's being addressed, and in turn the writers are giving him some pretty fun stuff to do with other supporting characters like Steve Lombard, further building out his character as well alongside Jimmy and even giving them some common ground, since Jimmy learns that Steve is his #1 hater when it comes to all things Flamebird, and they end up somewhat bonding over it a little bit. So Lois and Clark continue their investigation and Lois decides to try and corner Superman and get him to confess, following him around as he saves people around the city and literally cuffing herself to the superhero until he tells her the truth. It leads to a very fun action sequence between both them and the villain of the episode, Heatwave, who this time around has been redesigned as a tall, buff woman, something I am absolutely not complaining about. Heatwave though isn't really there to fight, only to flee, since she thinks that Superman has been kidnapping all of the people with this tech, but really it's Deathstroke, who on Waller's orders hunts these rogues down. This leads Superman to battle Deathstroke and his robots, which we saw in the first episode, and they intend to also capture him for Waller and the mysterious General. It's a very cool chaotic fight to round out the episode with, and it's quite interesting since once civilians are put in danger, the General orders a retreat, allowing Superman to save them and live to fight another day. I'm going to go out on a wild guess and say that the General is Sam Lane. It's quite obvious and I'm sure that'll be a big reveal later down the line. The episode ends with a big cliffhanger as well, actually 2 big cliffhangers, with Clark finally revealing his identity to Lois and her seemingly breaking off their friendship and whatever else they had developing in the background in a romantic capacity. It's not just that though, as well as Jimmy, who has been trying to get a Bigfoot camping trip organized across the entire episode, decides to go out on it on his own since he can't get in contact with Lois and Clark, and he seemingly comes into contact with a giant Bigfoot gorilla who is either going to be Gorilla Grodd or the Ultra Humanite, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they do with that character in next week's episode. My Adventures with Superman really went all out as we reached the midway through season 1. I'm absolutely loving all of the different character work being done between Lois and Clark, but Jimmy Olsen was really the star of this episode, getting some really fantastic new depth as he carves out his little niche within the series. I'm going to give this episode a 10 out of 10, so check it out. And if you want to check out some more of my content, why not stick around and check out my other content? Why not check out Ultimate Invasion Issue 2, or what I thought about last week's episode of My Adventures with Superman.